The air inside the ballroom was warm and filled with the soft hum of chatter, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Gold lights shimmered above long tables draped in white linen. Waiters and waitresses moved quietly between the guests, balancing trays of sparkling drinks and small plates of appetizers. Among them was a young woman named Evelyn. She wore a simple black uniform, her hair neatly tied back and her steps careful as she moved through the room. She had worked at the hotel for almost a year, saving every extra coin she could. The job was tiring, but it was steady, and she was grateful for it. That evening was different from the usual events. The hotel was hosting a charity gala, one of the biggest of the year. Important people from the city were their business owners, politicians, actors, and the kind of wealthy guests who arrived in black cars with drivers waiting outside. At the center of it all was Charles Davenport, the host of the evening. He was known for his money, his charm, and sometimes for the sharp way he used both. He had built his fortune in real estate and enjoyed being the center of attention. People laughed louder when he spoke and nodded quickly when he made a comment. Charles loved these events. They made him feel admired, respected, even powerful. And tonight, as he stood near the grand piano in the corner of the room, sipping champagne and talking with his guests, he felt completely at home. Evelyn had seen him before, from a distance. He was a regular at the hotel, always confident, always surrounded by people. She had never spoken to him directly, and she didn't plan to. Her only focus that night was to do her job quietly and get through the shift without mistakes. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. When the music paused between performances, Evelyn walked past the piano to collect empty glasses. For a brief moment, she stopped and looked at it. It was a beautiful black grand piano, its surface shining under the lights. Her eyes softened as she stared at the keys. She had loved playing piano once. Years ago, when she was younger, she had dreamed of studying music. She had even played at small school events and community recitals. But life had shifted quickly. Her father's illness, bills that piled up, and the need for work forced her to leave that dream behind. Now her hands were used to carrying trays, not gliding across keys. Still, she couldn't help but pause for a second. Lost in memory. Charles, standing nearby, noticed her lingering glance. He raised an eyebrow. "You look like you recognize that instrument," he said with a faint smirk. His tone was casual, but there was an edge of amusement in it, the kind that often came before a test. Evelyn turned, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry." "Sir," she said quickly, "I didn't mean to." He waved a hand. No, I was only curious. Do you play?" There was a short silence. Evelyn hesitated, unsure if answering honestly was wise. "I used to," she said softly. "A long time ago." Charles chuckled, swirling his glass. "Used to? That's a shame. Maybe you can still manage a tune or two?" She smiled politely. "It's been years. I don't think I could anymore." The people standing around Charles turned their heads, sensing entertainment. He had that kind of influence when he spoke. Others paid attention. A few guests leaned in, curious about what might happen next. Charles studied her for a moment. "Well, tonight's a night for charity and surprises," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "How about giving us a little performance? I'm sure everyone would enjoy it." Evelyn froze. For a second, she thought he was joking. But when she saw the amused expressions around him, she realized he wasn't. "Oh, I couldn't, sir," she said quickly, her cheeks warming. "I'm working. And I really—" "Nonsense," he interrupted, still smiling. "We all need a bit of music between courses. What do you say, everyone?" Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Some clapped playfully, encouraging her. Others watched with polite smiles, not quite sure if they should join in. Evelyn's heart began to pound. She could feel her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't part of her job. She didn't like being in the spotlight, especially not as a joke for the rich guests' amusement. But Charles wasn't backing down. "Come now," he said, his voice still smooth but firm. "Just one song. You can even choose it yourself. Think of it as a contribution to the night's entertainment." She swallowed hard. She could tell there was no graceful way to refuse without seeming rude or disrespectful. Every eye in the group was on her. "I really don't think I remember." "Much," she said weakly. "That's all right," Charles replied, setting down his glass. "We'll take whatever you can give us." His tone was light, but he carried a challenge one that made her stomach twist. He wasn't asking because he cared about music. He wanted to see if she'd stumble. Maybe he thought it would be amusing. To watch a nervous waitress try and fail in front of a ballroom full of people. Evelyn looked down at her tray. Her mind raced. She could refuse and risk being seen as difficult, or she could try and play, hoping to get through it quickly. And quietly, she took a slow breath. "All right," she said softly. "Just for a moment." Charles smiled and stepped aside, gesturing toward the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced dramatically, "our lovely waitress has agreed to share her talent with us tonight." Applause. Broke out light, teasing, not cruel, but not kind either. Evelyn felt her face grow warm. She placed her tray on a nearby table and walked to the piano. Her legs felt heavy. The room seemed too quiet now, too expectant. When she sat down, the seat felt strange, unfamiliar, though she had spent so many hours on similar ones in her past life. Her fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant in that moment. Memories flashed her mother, sitting beside her during practice. The sound of old wooden floors creaking under the pedal, the applause of her small school audience. She swallowed hard. It had been so long since she'd touched a piano. She pressed one key gently. The note rang out, pure and steady. Then another. Slowly, her hands began to find their place. She wasn't sure what she would play, but the rhythm found her before she could think. A simple melody formed, soft and trembling at first. The crowd's laughter faded into silence. The sound filled the air, hesitant but beautiful. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself, for the girl who had once believed in music. Her heart calmed with each note. The trembling stopped. The sound grew stronger. She forgot about the eyes watching her and let the music carry her from across the room. Charles watched with raised eyebrows. This wasn't what he expected. He thought she would stumble through a few notes, smile awkwardly, and step away. But what he saw now was something different. The melody carried emotion, something raw and real that even the most polished pianist couldn't fake. He didn't say a word, but his expression changed slightly, from amusement to something more. Thoughtful. The guests around him were silent too, caught off guard by the quiet power of her playing. A few exchanged looks. One woman whispered softly, "She's incredible." Evelyn's song came to an end after a few minutes. The last note lingered in the air before fading into the soft hum of the room. She sat still for a moment, then slowly stood up. Her face was flushed, her hands slightly shaking again, but not from fear this time. The silence broke into applause. It wasn't teasing anymore. It was real. Gentle at first, then growing stronger as more people joined in. Charles smiled, clapping too, though his eyes stayed fixed on her. "Impressive," he said quietly. Evelyn gave a small nod, unsure what to say. She felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. For a moment, she had been someone else, not a waitress, not the quiet worker in the corner, but the person she used to be. As she walked away, picking up her tray again, she heard whispers behind her, admiring ones, curious ones. The mood in the room had shifted. Charles watched her go, still thinking. There was more to her than he had guessed. And something about the way she played stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time, but he didn't say it. Not yet. The night moved on, the music resumed, and the guests went back to their laughter and drinks. But for both of them, for Evelyn and for Charles, the evening had already changed in a quiet, invisible way neither of them fully understood. After Evelyn finished playing, the sound of applause slowly faded, replaced by the steady hum of voices returning to normal conversation. The guests went back to their drinks and laughter, but something about the room had changed. The mood was lighter, softer, like the music had left a small warmth behind. Evelyn didn't stay to enjoy it. She quietly picked up her tray and went back to her work. Her hands were still trembling a little, but she felt something inside her she hadn't felt in years, a quiet spark of confidence, a reminder of who she once was. Still, she wished the night would hurry along so she could go home. The last thing she wanted was more attention. But Charles wasn't done thinking about her performance. He kept glancing toward her as the evening went on, sipping his champagne and half listening to the people around him. He couldn't stop replaying the sound of that melody in his head. There had been something in it that touched him, something honest and deeply human. He had expected a clumsy attempt at a song, maybe a few nervous mistakes. Instead, she had played like someone who carried years of emotion behind every note, and that unsettled him. Charles wasn't used to being surprised. In his world, money and status told him everything he needed to know about people. But that girl, just a waitress in a plain uniform, had managed to silence a ballroom full of people. After a while, he left his group and walked over to the buffet table where she was standing. Evelyn looked up, startled to see him approach. "You played very well," he said. His tone was lighter now, less mocking. "I didn't expect that." She gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you, sir. I just tried to remember something I used to love." "You used to love it?" he asked, picking up a plate he didn't really want. "What stopped you?" Evelyn hesitated. "Life, I guess," she said simply. "Things change. You have to do what's necessary." He studied her for a moment. "That's a shame. Talent like that shouldn't go to waste." Evelyn didn't know how to answer, so she just nodded. Then another guest called Charles's name from across the room, and he smiled politely before walking away. She exhaled softly. She hoped that would be the end of it, but word of her performance spread quickly among the guests. A few people came by to compliment her, asking if she had ever played professionally. Evelyn answered modestly, trying to stay humble, but inside she felt proud. It had been years since anyone looked at her that way, with respect instead of pity. Later that evening, after the speeches and dinner, the crowd grew livelier. The band took a break, and guests began to mingle freely, drifting toward the open bar or the patio outside. Evelyn was clearing glasses near the back of the room when she heard someone call her name. She turned to see one of the hotel managers gesturing her over. "Mr. Davenport would like a word," he said. Her heart sank a little. She didn't know if she had done something wrong. "Now?" she asked quietly. "Yes, over by the piano." She took a breath and walked toward the corner where Charles was standing with a few of his guests. He looked relaxed, smiling as he chatted, but when he saw her approach, his eyes brightened slightly. "Ah, there you are," he said. "We were just talking about you." Evelyn froze. "About me?" "Yes," he said. "I was telling them how our talented waitress here gave us a lovely surprise earlier. They don't believe me, of course." A few of his friends chuckled. One man in a tuxedo said, "You mean she really played that piano?" "She did," Charles replied with a grin. "And quite well, too." Then he turned to her. Would you mind showing them? Evelyn's stomach dropped. Oh, I really shouldn't, she said quickly. I still have work to do, and Charles raised a hand. Just one song. We're all among friends here. She looked around. The people standing nearby had that same polite curiosity as before. Some looked genuinely interested, but others had that half-amused expression she had seen earlier, the one that made her feel small. Her cheeks warmed. Please, sir, I don't think. He smiled, his tone still gentle but firm. Don't. Be modest. You've already impressed us once. The guests began to encourage her again, clapping lightly, calling out for her to play. The pressure built, and she felt trapped all over again. She didn't want to disappoint anyone or risk offending the man who practically owned the evening dot. So, once more, she sat at the piano. The lights in the room seemed brighter now, the air thicker. The last time, it had been spontaneous, almost private. This time, it felt like a test. Her fingers hovered above the keys, but her mind went blank. She could feel every eye watching her. Her palms were sweaty. She tried to start, but the sound that came out was wrong, a missed note that made her wince. Someone in the back laughed quietly. She swallowed hard and tried again, forcing herself to focus. Slowly, painfully, the melody began to form. But it didn't feel the same. Her hands were stiff, her heart racing too fast. The gentle confidence she'd had before was gone. Halfway through, she made another mistake. The sound was sharp, awkward. The laughter came again, soft but unmistakable. She bit her lip and kept going, determined to finish. Charles watched silently, his expression unreadable. He hadn't expected her to struggle this much. For the first time that evening, he felt a small sting of guilt. When she finally ended, there was a short silence. The applause that followed was polite, not heartfelt. Evelyn stood up quickly, her face pale. "Excuse me," she whispered, and hurried away before anyone could stop her. She went through the side door into the service hallway, her breath shaky. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Her heart hurt. She felt foolish for agreeing to play again. The first time had been a moment of pride. Now it felt like she had been used for entertainment. She stayed there for a few minutes, just breathing. The sounds of the party were faint behind the door. She wanted to go home, but her shift wasn't over. When she finally went back out, she kept her head down and focused on her work. Later, near midnight, when most of the guests had gone and that music had ended, Charles found her again. She was wiping tables in the corner, moving quietly, hoping to finish quickly and leave unnoticed. He approached slowly. "You played beautifully the first time," he said softly. She didn't look up. "The first time, yes. The second time, not so much." He sighed. "That was my fault. I shouldn't have asked you to do that again. I didn't realize it would make you uncomfortable." Evelyn stopped and finally looked at him. "It's all right, sir. People like you don't have to realize things like that." Her words were gentle, not angry, but they hit him harder than he expected. "What do you mean by that?" he asked quietly. She gave a tired smile. "People notice you because of who you are. When you speak, people listen. When you make a joke, they laugh even if it's not funny. But someone like me, I don't get to make mistakes in front of people like that." Charles stared at her, not knowing what to say. He had spent years commanding rooms, making deals, being in control. But standing there in front of her, he felt something unusual: shame, maybe even admiration. He cleared his throat. "You're right," he said finally. "And I'm sorry." Evelyn nodded. "It's fine, really." There was an awkward silence. Then she went back to cleaning, and he stood there for a moment longer before walking away. Outside, the last of the cars were pulling away. The hotel staff began to clear the tables and sweep the floor. Evelyn finished her shift quietly, then changed into her coat and stepped out into the cold night. The city lights glimmered on the wet pavement. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the bus stop. As she walked, she thought about what had happened, the way the room had gone silent during her first song, the way people had looked at her. Even if the second time had gone badly, she couldn't forget that first moment. It had felt real. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of her refused to let that feeling die and miles away. In his penthouse apartment, Charles sat by his window, a drink in his hand, staring at the city. Below, he couldn't stop thinking about her words or the look on her face when she played. He had wanted to make her prove herself, but instead, she had made him question something he hadn't thought about in years. For the first time in a long while, the man who had everything felt like he was missing something important. The morning after the gala, the hotel was quiet. The ballroom that had been full of laughter and music just hours before was now being cleaned by staff, the scent of flowers and spilled wine lingering in the air. Evelyn arrived early for her next shift, her uniform freshly washed, her hair tied neatly as always. She tried to push away thoughts of the night before, but they followed her everywhere. The way everyone had looked at her when she sat at the piano, the laughter when she missed a note, and the quiet apology from Charles afterward, all of it replayed in her mind like a scene she couldn't turn off. She told herself to forget it. It was just one night. People like him would move on quickly, and so should she. But part of her couldn't forget the first song, the way it had felt when the music took over, and for a brief moment she remembered who she was before life had become a series of shifts and bills. That feeling kept flickering inside her like a small light she couldn't put out. By afternoon, she was back to her usual work routine, setting up tables, taking orders, smiling politely at guests. The staff talked about how successful the event had been, how generous Mr. Davenport's donations were, and how it had been one of the best nights the hotel had hosted all year. Evelyn stayed quiet, listening but not joining in. Later that day, as she was organizing glasses behind the counter, her manager came over. "Evelyn," he said, "Mr. Davenport called this morning. He asked if you could come up to his office this evening after your shift." She froze. "He asked for me?" "Yes," the manager said, looking a little impressed. "Said he wanted to speak with you about something personal." "Don't worry," it sounded polite. Evelyn nodded slowly. Her first thought was worry. Had she done something wrong? Maybe she had offended him somehow? But the manager's calm tone eased her nerves a little. When her shift ended that evening, she changed out of her uniform and straightened her blouse. The hotel's top floor was quiet, lined with offices and conference rooms. She took the elevator up, her heart thumping softly as the doors opened. Charles's office was large but tastefully simple. A wide glass window overlooked the city skyline, and the sunset painted the walls with soft orange light. He was sitting behind a desk when she walked in, reading something on his tablet. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Ah, Evelyn. Please, come in." She stepped forward, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Good evening, sir." He gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit down." She sat, unsure what to expect. "I wanted to thank you again for playing last night," he began. "You probably didn't realize it, but your performance was the most talked about moment of the evening." She blinked. "Talked about?" "I thought people were laughing." He smiled lightly. "Some were, but others were genuinely moved. You surprised everyone, including me." Evelyn looked down, unsure how to respond. He continued, "I have to admit something. When I asked you to play, I didn't do it kindly. I thought it would be amusing, a little test of courage. But then you played that first song, and I realized I was wrong. You weren't just good. You were extraordinary." She looked up, surprised by his honesty. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." He leaned back in his chair. "Do you still play at all? Outside of work?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I haven't touched a piano in years, not seriously. Life's been busy." "I see," he said quietly. "What if I told you I could help you play again?" Evelyn frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. "Help me?" He stood up and walked toward the window. "You have something rare, real talent. But talent like that needs a chance to grow. I know people in the music world, teachers, event organizers, sponsors. I could make some introductions for you, if you're willing." She blinked, trying to process his words. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he said, turning to face her. "You deserve more than serving tables. You belong somewhere your gift can be seen." Evelyn's heart raced. It sounded too good to be true. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he said with a smile. "Let me help you." She hesitated. "Why me, though? You don't even know me." He looked thoughtful. "You're right. But I know what it feels like to have a dream you bury, because life gets in the way." There was something in his voice, a quiet sadness that made her believe him. He picked up a small card from his desk and handed it to her. "Here, it's the name of a music academy. The director owes me a favor. Go there tomorrow. Tell them I sent you." Evelyn stared at the card, her mind spinning. She didn't know whether to trust him or be cautious. But the part of her that still remembered how the piano made her feel wanted to believe it was real. "I'll think about it," she said softly. He smiled. "That's all I ask." When she left the office, the evening sky was turning dark, and city lights were beginning to glow. She walked home with the card in her pocket, running her fingers over it again and again. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the echo of her own music in her head, and Charles's words, "You belong somewhere your gift can be seen." The next morning, she took the bus to the address on the card. The building was old but charming, with a large wooden sign that read Riverside Music Academy. Through the glass door, she saw people practicing instruments, their notes filling the air. When she walked in, a woman at the front desk greeted her warmly. "Can I help you?" Evelyn hesitated, then held out the card. "Mr. Davenport sent me. He said I should ask for the director." The woman's expression brightened. "Ah, yes. He called this morning. Please wait a moment." A few minutes later, the director, a kind-looking older man, came out to meet her. "You must be Evelyn," he said with a smile. "Charles told me about your performance. He said you played beautifully." Evelyn blushed slightly. "That was a long time ago. I'm not sure I remember much." He chuckled. "That's what practice is for. Come, let's see what you can do." He led her into a quiet room with a piano. It wasn't as grand as the one at the hotel, but it looked well cared for. "Take your time," he said. "Play whatever feels right." Evelyn sat down, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected to be sitting at a piano again so soon. Her fingers rested on the keys, uncertain at first. Then slowly she began to play. The notes came softly at first, like they were waking up after a long sleep. But soon her hands remembered. The sound grew stronger, fuller. The room filled with music, gentle, emotional, and honest. When she finished, the director nodded with quiet approval. "You have real potential," he said. "We'd be happy to have you here for lessons. Mr. Davenport has already offered to cover the fees." Evelyn's eyes widened. "He did?" "Yes. He said he wants nothing in return, just that you promise to take it seriously." She didn't know what to say. Gratitude and disbelief tangled inside her. "I will," she said softly. "I promise." That night, as she walked home, her steps felt lighter. For the first time in years, she felt like life was giving her a second chance. Charles, meanwhile, was at his office late, looking out at the city lights. His assistant asked if he needed anything else before leaving, but he waved her off. He wasn't thinking about his usual business deals or investments. He was thinking about Evelyn, about the way her music had stirred something he had long forgotten, the love he once had for the piano, before money and ambition had taken over. He wondered if helping her was just charity, or if it was something more personal, a way to reclaim a part of himself through her courage. Either way, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. The weeks that followed felt like a new beginning for Evelyn. Every morning, after finishing her shifts at the hotel, she went straight to the music academy. At first, she was nervous. Her hands were rusty, her timing uncertain, and she often felt out of place among the younger students who practiced with confidence. But the more she played, the more she remembered. The director, patient and encouraging, guided her gently. "Music doesn't forget you," he often said. "You just have to listen long enough to find your way back." And he was right. Bit by bit, her fingers grew stronger, her rhythm smoother. She stayed after class to practice until the janitor turned off the lights. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and play the same song she had performed at the Gale, the song that had changed everything. Each time she played, she felt closer to herself again. Meanwhile, Charles checked in quietly from a distance. He didn't visit the academy often, but he called the director now and then to ask how she was doing. He never asked for details, only whether she was showing up and improving. He didn't want her to feel like she owed him anything. He simply wanted to make sure she had the chance to grow. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Charles attended a business meeting at the hotel where Evelyn still worked. He didn't plan to see her, but when he walked through the lobby, there she was carrying a tray of coffee for guests, her hair pulled back neatly, a small, tired smile on her face. He hesitated before approaching her. "You're still working here?" he asked gently. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Yes, sir. I can't just leave. Music lessons don't pay the bills." He smiled slightly. "That's true. But how are the lessons going?" Her expression softened. "Better than I ever expected. It's hard, but I love it. I can't thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just promise me you'll keep going." "I will," she said quietly. There was a short pause. Then he added, "You know, I've been thinking. The hotel is hosting another charity event next month. Would you be willing to play there? This time as a guest performer, not as staff?" Evelyn blinked. "Me? Play at another event?" "Yes," he said, properly this time. "No surprise, no pressure. I'll arrange everything. You just bring your music." She hesitated, her heart racing. "I don't know if I'm ready. What if I make mistakes?" He smiled kindly. "Then make them beautifully." The warmth in his voice made her laugh softly. She nodded. "All right. I'll do it." From that day on, her life took on a new rhythm. She worked mornings, practiced afternoons, and in the evenings, she walked home humming the songs she was learning. The upcoming event became her quiet motivation, but as the date drew closer, she began to feel the same nervousness she had felt before the first gala. Late at night, she would sit at the old piano in the academy's side room, her fingers trembling slightly as she practiced. What if they laugh again? She asked the director one evening, "What if I freeze?" He smiled. "Then you start again. Music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. And you, my dear, play with truth." His words stayed with her. On the night of the new gala, the ballroom was once again filled with guests dressed in fine clothes. the sound of conversation echoing under the chandeliers. The same grand piano stood near the center, polished and shining. But this time, Evelyn wasn't wearing her waitress uniform. She wore a simple pale dress that Charles had arranged for her, nothing extravagant, but elegant. Her hair was down, her nerves hidden behind a calm smile. Charles greeted guests near the entrance, but his eyes kept drifting toward the piano. When he saw Evelyn walk in, his expression softened. He excused himself and walked over to her. "You look confident," he said. "Trying to be," she replied with a small laugh. "It feels strange standing here and not holding a tray." He chuckled. "You've earned the right to be here for your talent, not your service." As the evening went on, the room grew louder, filled with conversation and music from the band. Then, when it was time, Charles took the microphone and stepped up to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his deep voice commanding attention, "tonight we have a special performance. Some of you may remember a young woman who surprised you all at our last gathering. Her music touched more hearts than any speech could. Tonight, she returns not as a waitress, but as a musician." There was a quiet murmur of curiosity and applause as Evelyn stepped forward. She took her seat at the piano. The room grew still. This time, she wasn't playing to prove herself. She wasn't playing out of fear or embarrassment. She was playing because she loved it. Her fingers moved with grace, the notes flowing effortlessly, soft at first, then stronger. The melody filled the hall, carrying both joy and sorrow, triumph and peace. Every sound seemed to tell a story of struggle, loss, and finding courage again. People stopped eating. They stopped talking. Even the waiters paused to listen. Charles stood near the side, watching her, and for a moment he felt something stir deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. The way she played reminded him of his younger self, the boy who had once dreamed of being a pianist before his family told him music wouldn't pay the bills. When the song ended, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then applause erupted, louder than before. Evelyn stood and smiled shyly. She could hardly believe it. This time, the applause wasn't polite. It was genuine, full of admiration. Charles stepped forward, clapping with the rest. "You see?" he said softly when she came off the stage. "I told you they'd listen." Her eyes shimmered slightly, though she tried to hide it. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Just keep playing," he said. The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur. Guests came to congratulate her, asking about her training, her music, her plans. Evelyn answered with humility, still in disbelief at how far she had come in just a few weeks. Later, when the event ended and most of the guests had gone, Charles found her again near the piano. She was running her fingers lightly over the keys, almost absent-mindedly. "You played beautifully," he said quietly. "Thank you," she whispered. It felt different this time, like I wasn't afraid anymore. He smiled. "That's how you know you're doing what you're meant to do." She looked up at him. "Do you ever miss it? Playing, I mean." He paused, his gaze distant. "Every day," he admitted. "But I made choices. Life became about deals and numbers instead of notes and melody. I told myself I was being practical, but seeing you play," he sighed softly, "it reminds me of who I was before all this." Evelyn smiled gently. "It's never too late, you know." He raised an eyebrow. "Too late for what?" "To play again," she said simply. He chuckled. "I haven't touched a piano in years." "Then it's time," she said, stepping aside. "Play something." He stared at her for a moment, half amused, half nervous. "You're serious? Completely?" He hesitated, then finally sat down. He placed his hands on the keys, uncertain at first. The room was empty now, just the two of them, and the quiet hum of the lights. He pressed a few keys, testing the sound. Then, slowly, he began to play. The melody was clumsy at first, but then something shifted. The music grew smoother, more familiar. Evelyn watched quietly as his confidence returned, note by note. When he finished, there was silence. "That was beautiful," she said softly. He laughed under his breath. "It's been a long time." "And yet you still have it," she said. For the first time in years, Charles felt something he hadn't felt in a long while. Peace. They stood together for a moment, the grand piano between them, both smiling. Quietly. That night, when they went their separate ways, neither of them realized how much that moment would change the course of their lives. Evelyn went home, feeling lighter than ever before. She no longer felt like the quiet girl who served drinks in the background. She felt like herself again, a musician, a dreamer, someone with a future. And Charles, sitting alone in his car, couldn't stop thinking about her words. It's never too late to play again. Maybe she was right. The following weeks passed quietly, but something inside both Evelyn and Charles had changed. Evelyn practiced every day, not just because she had lessons, but because music now felt like air to her. It was the one thing that kept her calm, focused, and alive. Whenever she played, she felt as if the world stopped spinning, and all the noise around her faded away. She also started getting small invitations to play at small hotel dinners and weekend gatherings. People who had attended the second gala remembered her performance and began asking for her. Each show gave her a little more confidence. Sometimes she would see Charles sitting quietly in the back of the room, not announcing himself or drawing attention. He just listened. He always left before she could thank him, but she knew he was there. One day, she finally called him. "Are you still checking on me secretly?" she asked with a smile in her voice. He chuckled on the other end. "I wouldn't say secretly. I just prefer not to distract you." "Well, you don't distract me," she said softly. "You helped me find my music again. I think you should hear what you helped create." He paused for a moment. "You make it sound like I did something extraordinary. All I did was open a door, and that door changed everything," she replied. There was a short silence. Then Charles said, "I'm glad you walked through it." After that call, they spoke more often. Their conversations were never forced or heavy. They talked about music, life, choices, and the strange way people lose touch with their dreams. Charles told her more about his younger years, how he had studied piano seriously in college, dreaming of performing in concert halls. But when his father passed away, he was expected to take over the family business. "It wasn't a choice," he said quietly. "It was an obligation. And when you start living for duty instead of passion, you stop feeling alive." Evelyn listened quietly. "Maybe duty isn't the opposite of passion," she said. "Maybe it's just another way of showing it. You took care of what you had, too, and now you're finding your way back." He smiled softly at her words. "You sound wiser than your years." She laughed. "Or maybe I've just spent too much time learning from life instead of school." In truth, she had learned a lot from her struggles. Every dish she washed, every night she worked late, every dream she buried, it all built her patience and humility. Now, when people praised her, she didn't feel proud. She just felt grateful. One afternoon, she got a call from the director of the academy. "We're organizing a spring concert," he said. "Students and professionals from the city will perform. I'd like you to be part of it." Her heart jumped. "Me? In a concert?" "Yes," he said. "You've earned your place." When she hung up, she immediately thought of Charles. That evening, she called him again. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "What is it?" He asked. "I've been invited to perform in the spring concert." There was a pause, then a warm laugh from his end. "That's wonderful news, Evelyn. You deserve it." "I'm nervous," she admitted. "This will be the first time I play in front of so many people who actually know music." He replied gently, "Nerves mean you care. Just don't let them stop you. I'll be there, sitting in the front row, cheering quietly." Her heart softened at his words. "You promise?" "I promise," he said. The weeks leading up to the concert were intense. Evelyn practiced until her hands ached. She tried different pieces, but finally settled on one she had written herself, a soft, emotional melody that told her story through music. The night of the concert arrived. The auditorium was packed. Families, teachers, and guests filled every seat. The air buzzed with excitement. Backstage, Evelyn's hands shook. She could hear the murmur of the audience through the curtain, the smell of the polished wood, the faint hum of tuning instruments. It all made her heart race. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she saw the same girl who had once been laughed at the first gala. The same girl who almost gave up her dream. But this time she was ready. When her name was called, she stepped out onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the faces, but she spotted one familiar figure in the front row, Charles, sitting straight, his eyes calm and proud. She sat down at the piano. The hall went silent. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out, clear and steady. The sound spread through the room like a story being told without words. She played softly at first, then stronger, pouring her heart into every note. It wasn't just music, it was her life. The struggles, the late nights, the laughter, the humiliation, the kindness that saved her. It was all there. Charles listened, his chest tightening with emotion. Every note reminded him of something he'd lost long ago, the feeling of creating beauty without purpose or profit. He realized he had missed that feeling more than anything. When she finished, there was silence for a second, and then the crowd erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Evelyn stood, tears in her eyes, bowing deeply. After the concert, she walked backstage, still trembling with joy. Charles was waiting there, standing near the curtain. When she saw him, she smiled through her tears. "You made it," she said. "I told you I wouldn't miss it," he said softly. They stood there for a moment, both overwhelmed. "That piece," he said quietly. "It was yours, wasn't it?" She nodded. "Yes, I wrote it after the first gala. It's about finding courage again." "It was beautiful," he said. Every note felt alive. Evelyn looked at him curiously. "Do you ever wish you had chosen music instead of business?" He hesitated, then said, "I used to think I'd lost my chance. But watching you, helping you, it made me realize I can still have music in my life, just in a different way." She smiled softly. "Maybe it's time for you to play again." He chuckled. "You won't stop until I do, will you?" "Not a chance," she teased. A week later, Charles visited the academy. The director welcomed him warmly and offered him a quiet practice room. He sat at the piano for the first time in years, his fingers stiff, his timing off, but the sound still felt familiar. It still felt like home. As he played, Evelyn walked by and heard him through the door. She didn't interrupt. She just listened with a quiet smile. He was rusty, but the music was real. It was honest. It was him. When he finished, she entered the room softly. "You still have it," she said. He laughed lightly. "Barely. But it's there," she said. "It never left you." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, you've taught me something important. I thought I was helping you, but it turns out you were helping me." She shook her head. "We helped each other." That simple truth hung between them. From then on, Charles began playing regularly again. Not for show, not for anyone's approval, just for himself. Sometimes he and Evelyn would play together, trading melodies, laughing. When they made mistakes, their connection wasn't about money or gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, a friendship built on shared dreams, on the beauty of second chances. As spring turned into summer, Evelyn's name began appearing in small concert programs and local newspapers. People called her the waitress pianist, whose story inspired hope. She didn't chase fame. She just kept playing. Each performance was a reminder of how far she had come, and how one act of kindness could change a life. And Charles, now quieter, simpler in his ways, started donating pianos to schools and community centers. "Talent is everywhere," he said in one interview. "It just needs a place to breathe." Whenever people asked who inspired him to start again, he only smiled and said, "Someone who taught me that music isn't about perfection. It's about heart." Months passed, and life began to settle into a calm, beautiful rhythm for both Evelyn and Charles. Evelyn had found her voice through music. Every morning she woke up early, made coffee, and spent hours practicing before heading out for small performances around the city. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and so did her sense of peace. People started recognizing her, not as the girl who used to serve at fancy parties, but as the woman whose music touched hearts. Some even wrote letters, telling her how her story inspired them to chase their own dreams again. She never bragged or sought attention. She played because it made her feel alive. That was all she ever wanted. Charles, on the other hand, had quietly changed his life in ways no one expected. The same man who once filled his days with meetings, numbers, and business deals now spent his mornings at the piano. He no longer rushed. He no longer measured his worth in profit. He had rediscovered something that money could never give him: peace of mind. He also started teaching children from underprivileged families how to play music. At first, he did it through donations, but soon he began sitting with the kids himself, showing them how to press the keys gently, how to feel the rhythm. He said it reminded him of how Evelyn had once reminded him of himself. Every week, Evelyn visited the music center where the children practiced. Sometimes she'd play duets with them. Other times she'd just listen and encourage. The place was filled with laughter and the sound of mismatched melodies, but every note carried hope. One afternoon, Charles called Evelyn. "I have something I want to show you," he said. She smiled through the phone. "Is it another surprise event?" He laughed softly. "Not this time. Just meet me at the old concert hall downtown tomorrow afternoon." When she arrived the next day, she found him standing in the middle of the empty hall, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars. "What is this?" she asked curiously. He turned to her with a quiet smile. "I bought it." Her eyes widened. "You bought the whole hall?" "Yes," he said. "It was going to be torn down, but I thought, why not give it a second life, like we did?" She looked around in awe. The wooden seats, the old stage, the faded curtains, it all looked tired, but beautiful in its own way. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. He looked at the piano on the stage, covered in a white sheet. "We're going to bring music back here, for everyone. No tickets, no expensive suits, no judgment. Just music." Her eyes softened. "You mean free performances?" He nodded. "Exactly. Anyone can come. Anyone can play. It doesn't matter if you're a professional or a beginner. I want this place to remind people that art belongs to everyone." Evelyn's voice trembled slightly. "That's beautiful, Charles." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "And I want you to be the first one to play here." Her heart skipped a beat. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "You started this journey. It's only right that you open it." She tried to protest, but he shook his head gently. "It's not a favor. It's something I want to do for both of us." A few weeks later, after the repairs and cleaning were done, the concert hall looked like new. The seats were polished, the walls repainted, and the stage gleamed under. Soft yellow lights. Charles had named it the Harmony Hall. The opening night was simple. There were no fancy decorations or red carpets. People from all walks of life came: office workers, students, families, and even a few people who had once worked at the hotel with Evelyn. When she stepped onto the stage that night, she felt a wave of emotion. She could see familiar faces the crowd, smiling, supportive, expectant. Charles sat in the front row, his eyes calm, his hands folded. She took a deep breath and began to play. The melody she chose was the same one she had performed at her very first gala, but this time it sounded different. It was fuller, deeper, more alive. The notes danced through the hall, echoing off the high ceiling. It wasn't just music, it was a story of redemption, kindness, and second chances. As she played, memories rushed through her mind. The night of humiliation, the trembling hands, the first applause, the lessons, the fear, the laughter. Every note felt like a piece of her life coming full circle. When the final chord faded, the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Evelyn stood, smiling with tears in her eyes. Charles walked up onto the stage and stood beside her. The applause grew louder. He looked at her proudly. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "So have you," she replied. He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice warm and steady, "this young woman reminded me, and maybe all of us, that success isn't about power or wealth. It's about courage. It's about finding your way back to what truly matters." The crowd cheered again, and Evelyn blushed slightly, but she smiled. That night marked the beginning of something new. The Harmony Hall became a special place in the city, a place where people could gather not to impress, but to connect. Every weekend, musicians came to play: students, waiters, retirees, and even children who had just learned their first notes. Evelyn helped organize the performances, and Charles quietly funded the instruments and maintenance. They never advertised. Word simply spread. One evening, as the sun set and the hall emptied after a long performance, Charles sat at the piano alone. Evelyn walked in quietly and sat beside him. "You still play beautifully," she said softly. He smiled without looking up. "You taught me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest," she nodded. "That's true." He turned to her. "Do you ever think about how strange it is? How one small moment can change everything?" She smiled. "Every day. If you hadn't embarrassed me that night, none of this would have happened." He winced playfully. "I still feel bad about that." She laughed. "Don't. You didn't know what would come from it. Maybe life planned it that way." He looked thoughtful. "Maybe it did." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The hall was quiet, except for the faint hum of the lights and the distant sounds of the city outside. Finally, Evelyn said softly, "You know, I used to think the piano was just an instrument, but now I realize it's like a bridge. It connects people who might never have met otherwise." He nodded. "And some bridges are worth building." Years later, the Harmony Hall became a cherished landmark. Newspapers wrote stories about it, how a millionaire and a waitress had turned an act of humiliation into a legacy of kindness. Evelyn continued to play there for years, her music inspiring countless others. She also started teaching young musicians who couldn't afford lessons, passing on the same kindness she had received. Charles grew older, but he never lost his calm smile or his quiet love for music. Even when his hands grew stiff, he still came to every concert, sitting in the same front row seat. One evening, long after the crowd had left and the lights were dim, Evelyn found him sitting alone at the piano, his hands resting gently on the keys. "You're still here," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Just listening. To what?" she asked. He looked up at her and said, "To the sound of what we built." She walked over and sat beside him. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He nodded. "More than I ever imagined." They didn't play. That night, they just sat there, side by side, surrounded by the quiet echo of every song, every moment, every memory that had brought them here. And in that silence, there was peace pure and unspoken. Because sometimes the greatest music isn't played on a stage. It's the kind that lives in people's hearts long after the notes fade away.